When you spend your whole life building something, you begin to wonder who's truly standing beside you and who's only standing there for what you can give them. My name is Thomas Hale, a 68-year-old widower, retired businessman, and at least until a few months ago, a proud father of one. My son, Eric, had always been the brightest light in my life. After his mother passed away, I poured everything into him: my time, my love, my business, my wealth. He grew up in comfort. He never lacked anything. I wanted him to have a life better than mine, free from the struggles that once shaped me. But over the years, something began to change. It started subtly: phone calls that grew shorter, visits that became less frequent. Our Sunday lunches turned into rushed check-ins, and eventually I became something of a background character in his world, the man he'd text on birthdays and call only when he needed advice or money. At first I told myself it was natural. He had a family, a wife named Sophia, and 2 children. Life was busy, but deep down, a quiet ache started forming a question that wouldn't let me sleep. If I had nothing to give, would he still love me the same? It haunted me. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the grand living room of the home I'd built from decades of work, I realized something painful. My house had become quiet, but not peaceful. It was silent in the way abandoned places are silent. The laughter that once filled these walls, my wife's soft hums while cooking, Eric's teenage arguments, the clinking of dinner plates, all gone. Now it was just the ticking clock and me. That was the day I made my decision. I would test my son, not out of malice, not to punish him, but because I needed to know before I left this world whether the bond between us was real or just transactional. I called my lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, a man who had handled my estate for years. "Thomas," he said, after I explained my plan, "you're telling me you want to hide your wealth temporarily and see how your son reacts?" "Yes," I replied. "I want him to think I've lost everything. The business, the investments, the house. I want to see how he treats me when I have nothing left to offer." "Mr." Reynolds sighed softly. "That's a risky move. You might not like what you find." I smiled sadly. "I already suspect the truth. I just need to see it with my own eyes." And so, the process began. I transferred my assets into a private trust, leaving no trace in my son's reach. The mansion was legally put up for sale, though secretly I retained ownership through my attorney. My personal bank account was minimized to appear almost empty. Within weeks, I'd vanished not physically but financially. Then, one cold morning, I packed a single suitcase. Just some clothes, a few family photos, and my late wife's locket. I left my home quietly, like a ghost walking out of his own past. I rented a small, run-down room on the edge of town, a place no one would ever think to look for me. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor creaked, and the heater groaned louder than the night wind. It was humble, almost painfully so, but strangely freeing. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like Thomas Hale, the businessman. I was just Thomas, a tired, lonely man trying to understand the world he built. I spent a few days there, watching people from my small window, the factory workers, the mothers with grocery bags, the kids playing in the cold. They had little, yet their laughter sounded richer than anything I'd heard in years. It made me wonder when I'd last laughed with my son, really laughed. Not the polite kind you share to end a call. After a week, I decided to make my move. I called Eric from an old phone I'd bought secondhand. He picked up after 3 rings. "Dad? Why are you calling from this number?" His voice was distracted, hurried. "I had to change a few things," I said softly. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." There was a pause. Then a sigh. "I'm fine, Dad. Busy, you know? The kids have soccer. Sophia's planning some charity thing. It's been hectic." I smiled weakly. "I understand. It's just, well, I've been having some financial trouble lately. The business went under. Some bad investments." He was silent for a few seconds. "Wait, what do you mean? You lost money?" "All of it, son," I said quietly. "I had to sell the house too. I'm staying somewhere small for now. I just needed to tell you myself." "Wow," he finally said. "That's a lot to take in." His tone didn't sound shocked, more inconvenienced. "I was wondering if I could come by for dinner one of these days, just to talk. It's been so long." There was another long pause. I could hear faint voices in the background, his wife. maybe the kids. Finally, he replied, "Yeah, sure, maybe next week? Things are kinda tight right now, Dad. We've got people coming over this weekend." My throat tightened. "Of course, son. I understand." We hung up after a few polite exchanges. But the weight of that call sat heavy in my chest. Next week came and went. No call, no message. Just silence. Days turned into weeks. My savings, the small allowance I'd kept outside the trust, were running thin. I didn't expect him to rescue me, but I had hoped he'd check in. Maybe ask if I needed something. A visit, a warm meal. Instead, my phone remained quiet, and that's when something inside me shifted. The test I'd started as an experiment now began to hurt. I kept thinking of his childhood, how he'd cry when I came home late from work, how he'd hug me after every school play, how he'd promise Dad, when I grow up, "I'll take care of you like you take care of me." Was that love? Or was that just a child's fantasy? The silence from him made me wonder if I'd raised a son or a stranger who happened to share my blood. One evening, as I sat outside a small diner near my new place, a woman in her 50s walked over. She wore a simple apron and carried a weary but kind smile. "You've been sitting here every evening," she said. "You waiting for someone?" I chuckled, just waiting for time to move slower, I suppose. She smiled. "Well, time's cruel like that. I'm Emma. I work here. If you ever need a hot cup of coffee, it's on the house." I nodded, touched by her kindness. "Thank you, Emma. I might just take you up on that." That night, as I sipped the coffee she brought me, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: warmth. Not from money, not from comfort, but from human kindness. It wasn't family, but it was something close. Lying on my narrow bed later that night, I stared at the cracked ceiling and whispered to the darkness, "If my son cannot see me when I have nothing, he does not deserve to see what I still have." It was a bitter thought, but it was born from truth. The test was only beginning, but already the results were becoming clear. Still, a small part of me hoped desperately that maybe he'd come around. Maybe he'd realize what he was losing. I promised myself one thing: I would go to him. Not as the father he once admired, but as the poor man he might now look down upon. That visit would reveal everything. The hardest part of pretending to be poor isn't the lack of comfort. It's the way people start looking at you differently. When I left my house, I wasn't just leaving behind marble floors and silk curtains. I was leaving behind the version of myself people respected. Now, as I stood in front of my son's grand suburban house, wearing an old coat and scuffed shoes, I felt invisible. The man who had once written checks that changed lives was now just another tired face on the street. I took a deep breath. The air was cold, sharp. It bit at my skin as if trying to wake me up from this strange reality I'd created. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something heavier: disappointment mixed with hope. Would Eric even recognize the man I'd become? Would he open his door or his heart? The door that once welcomed me. I remembered this house vividly. I'd helped him buy it. Half the down payment had come from me. When he and Sophia first moved in, they'd invited me for dinner every Friday. Those nights were warm and full of laughter. But that was years ago. Now, as I rang the doorbell, the laughter was gone. The only sound was the echo of the chime disappearing into the halls. Moments later, the door opened. Sophia stood there perfectly dressed, her hair tied back neatly, her expression polite but distant. "Mr. Hale?" she said, her brows furrowing for a second. "Oh my goodness, I almost didn't recognize you," I forced a smile. "It's been a while, Sophia. I hope you're well." Yes, of course." She hesitated, her eyes scanning my worn-out jacket. "Is everything all right?" "I was hoping to see Eric," I said softly. "I called earlier this week, but he didn't answer." She glanced over her shoulder. "He's inside." "But he's just about to head out." "Who is it, Soph?" Eric's voice came from inside, and then he appeared. My son. He looked successful. Sharp suit, polished shoes, a gold watch gleaming under the hall light. For a brief second, I felt proud again, until I saw the flicker of discomfort cross his face when he saw me. "Dad," he said slowly, as if unsure whether to hug me or keep his distance. "You should have called first. I didn't want to bother you," I said, trying to sound casual, I was just in the area and thought I'd drop by." He exchanged a glance with Sophia, the kind of glance that says, "This is inconvenient." Still, he stepped aside. "Sure, come in. Just for a bit." The dinner that changed everything. The warmth of the house hit me immediately, not just in temperature but in contrast. Everything inside screamed wealth. A chandelier hung over the foyer. The living room smelled faintly of expensive candles, and children's laughter echoed from upstairs. For a moment, I allowed myself to smile. My grandchildren, I hadn't seen them in almost a year. Sophia walked into the kitchen. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Hale?" Her voice was polite, but her tone carried something sharp beneath the surface, as if every word was measured. "Tea would be lovely," I said. Eric motioned me to sit on the couch. "So, Dad, what brings you here?" I hesitated, "Just wanted to see you. It's been a long time, and I missed the family." He leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his eyes distant. "Yeah, things have been crazy. Work, the kids, everything." I nodded, forcing a smile. "How are the little ones?" "They're good," he said. "Actually, they're upstairs doing homework. They've got a big test coming up." Sophia returned, placing the cup of tea in front of me on a coaster, not directly on the table. The gesture was small, but it felt symbolic, a quiet reminder that I no longer belonged here. When love turns to embarrassment. "Dad," Eric said after a pause, "I heard about your situation. I'm really sorry things went south with your business." I nodded. "It happens. I'll manage." He hesitated, then added, "Are you doing okay financially? Do you have a place to stay?" His voice carried concern, but not warmth. It was the kind of concern you'd give a stranger you once knew. "I'm managing," I said softly. "It's not much, but I've got a roof." Sophia shifted uncomfortably. "That's good to hear. It must be quite an adjustment." There was a tone in her voice, subtle, but unmistakable. Pity disguised as politeness. "Was hoping," I said gently, "that maybe I could visit the kids sometime. I miss them dearly." Sophia exchanged another glance with Eric. "Well," Eric started, clearing his throat. "They've been pretty busy lately, but sure, we'll figure something out. Maybe in a few weeks." I nodded. The words, "a few weeks," sounded like a lifetime. The air grew heavier. I could feel their unease. My presence was disrupting their polished world. So I stood up, smiling to break the tension. I should get going. "I didn't mean to intrude." "Oh, don't be silly," Sophia said quickly, though her relief was barely hidden. "At least finish your tea." I sat back down, lifting the cup carefully. My hands shook slightly. I told myself it was from age, but I knew better. It was from humiliation. The dinner invitation. As I set the cup down, I heard small footsteps running down the stairs. "Grandpa." It was Lily, my granddaughter. 7 years old, bright eyes, a smile that could melt stone lily. I said, my heart warming instantly, "Oh, look at you. You've grown so much." She ran to me, hugging my legs tightly. "Daddy said you were sick." Eric's face stiffened. "I didn't say that exactly." Lily. Sophia stepped in. "Lily, sweetheart, Grandpa was just leaving." Lily pouted. "But I want to show him my drawing." Before they could stop her, she grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the kitchen table where her colorful sketches were spread out. I bent down, smiling through the ache in my chest. "These are beautiful, sweetheart." "You're going to be an artist." Lily beamed. "Will you come for dinner tomorrow, Grandpa?" "Mommy's making spaghetti." Sophia froze. Her polite smile faltered. Eric looked at me, then at her. Finally, he said, "Sure, Dad. Come for dinner tomorrow?" His voice was tight, forced, the kind of kindness that isn't kindness at all. But I accepted, because deep down, I still wanted to believe my son meant it. The next evening, I arrived early. My old coat clung to me against the wind as I walked up the driveway. The windows glowed warmly and laughter spilled out. I paused for a moment before ringing the bell, a small part of me still hoping this night would mend the cracks. When Sophia opened the door, her smile was thin. "Oh, you're early." "Yes," I said softly. Didn't want to miss the kids. Dinner was awkward. Sophia served the food with mechanical precision, her conversation clipped and careful. Eric spoke mostly about his work, about how stressful the market's been and how we've had to cut back on luxuries." I listened quietly, my fork moving slowly across the plate. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood. "You know, your mother would have loved this house. She always dreamed of you having a big family." Sophia smiled politely. "It's a lovely thought," but Eric just nodded, distracted, sipping his wine. The silence between us was louder than words. Halfway through dinner, Eric leaned back and sighed. "So, Dad, what's your plan now? Any idea how you're going to, get back on your feet?" I looked at him, searching his face for sincerity. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Maybe I'll find some part-time work. I don't need much, just something to keep me going." Sophia chuckled softly, not cruelly, but with that tone people use when they think they're being realistic. "At your age? I mean, that might be difficult, right?" The room went quiet. I set my fork down, slowly, maybe. "But I've never been afraid of work." Eric cleared his throat. "Well, if you need anything, I'll see what I can do. But things are tight right now, tight." The word stung. I knew his business was thriving. I'd helped fund it in the beginning. I understand. I said quietly, "I wouldn't want to be a burden." Sophia stood to clear the plates. "You're not a burden, Mr. Hale," she said automatically. "It's just, we're trying to stay focused on our future." Her words lingered in the air, polite, hollow, and final. After dinner, Lily tugged on my sleeve again. "Can you come to my school show next week, Grandpa?" Before I could answer, Sophia interrupted gently, "Sweetheart, Grandpa might be busy. Let's not make him feel bad if he can't come." Her voice was calm, but her eyes warned me to stay in my place. I nodded to Lily. "We'll see, sweetheart. I'll try." When I stood to leave, Eric walked me to the door. His face was tense, his voice low. "Dad, listen. Maybe it's better if you call before dropping by, okay? Sophia's schedule is crazy, and the kids—" "I understand," I said, cutting him off softly. He hesitated. "It's not that we don't want you here, it's just, space." "Of course," I said again. But inside, something cracked. The man who once couldn't spend a day without calling me now wanted space. As I stepped out into the cold night, the lights from his house glowed behind me, warm, golden, and closed off. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the home I helped build, not with bricks, but with love, sacrifices, and faith. Now, I wasn't sure if any of that had meant anything. I walked back to my small rented room that night, my steps slow and heavy. The air was damp with mist, and the streetlights blurred through my tired eyes. When I got inside, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the small photo album I'd brought with me, old pictures of Eric as a child. One photo caught my attention, his 5th birthday. His face covered in cake, his laughter echoing through memory. I had promised him that day, "You'll always have me, son." Always now, I wasn't sure if that promise still meant anything. I closed the album slowly. My test wasn't over, but the truth was beginning to reveal itself. And though it broke my heart, I knew this was only the beginning of what I had to see. Because love, when tested, shows its true color, and my son's was beginning to fade. I woke up the next morning to the soft gray light slipping through the cracked curtains of my small rented room. The air was cold, stale with the faint smell of damp wood and loneliness. For a while, I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, my hands clasped between my knees. I couldn't shake off the echo of last night, Eric's polite words, Sophia's tight smile, and the way their house had felt more like a museum than a home. I had been a guest in my own family's story. It wasn't anger that burned in me. Not yet. It was something quieter, more painful. The realization that love could turn cold without shouting, that respect could vanish without a fight. It just faded, like the warmth of a dying ember. I made myself a cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind that left a bitter aftertaste, and stared at my reflection in the fogged-up window. My face looked older than I remembered, tired eyes, unshaven chin, lines carved deep from years of responsibility and regret. I had once been a man others looked up to. Now, even my son looked down on me. I knew what I had to do next. My heart told me to walk away, to accept the truth and move on. But a father's heart doesn't work like that. You don't stop hoping. You don't stop believing that maybe, just maybe, your child will remember who you really are. So I decided to visit again, not out of pride, but out of love. One more dinner. One more chance. Maybe I could reach the son I used to know before money and comfort hardened him. Maybe I could remind him that family was not a business transaction. The week passed slowly. Each day felt longer than the one before. I kept myself busy doing small errands for my landlord, fixing broken things just to earn a few dollars and stay useful. But inside, I was counting the days until Sunday, the day I planned to show up again. When Sunday finally came, I polished my old shoes, even though the leather was too cracked to shine. I pressed my one good shirt and buttoned it carefully, smoothing down the collar. I told myself it wasn't about appearance, but truthfully, it was. I didn't want them to feel ashamed of me. By the time I reached Eric's house, the sky had turned golden with the fading afternoon sun. The windows glowed warmly again, just like before. From outside, I could hear laughter, not loud, but comfortable. It should have comforted me. Instead, it stung. I rang the doorbell. This time, Sophia opened the door slower, as if hoping it wasn't me. When she saw me, her face froze for a moment before she forced a smile. "Mr. Hale, I didn't know you were coming by tonight." "I know," I said gently. "I was nearby and thought I'd stop in. I brought something for the kids." She looked down at the small paper bag in my hand, 2 chocolate bars and a toy car I'd bought with what little money I had left. Her smile tightened. "That's very kind. But you really should have called. Eric's got some friends over tonight." "Oh," I said softly, trying not to sound disappointed. "I can come back another time." Before she could answer, a familiar voice called from inside. "Who's at the door?" "Soph." Eric appeared in the hallway wearing a crisp shirt, his hair neatly styled. When he saw me, he hesitated for just a second. Then his expression settled into polite surprise. "Dad, you came. I hope I'm not interrupting," I said. He looked past me as if checking to see if anyone from the neighborhood might be watching. No. Come in. We're just having dinner with a few colleagues. You can join us if you'd like." Sophia's smile faltered. "Eric, maybe." "It's fine," he said quickly, his tone firm. "He's my father." I stepped inside, clutching the paper bag. The sound of laughter came from the dining room. As I entered, 3 men and 2 women looked up from the table. They were all dressed elegantly, their glasses filled with wine, plates half finished with roast and salad. The conversation slowed as they saw me. "Everyone," Eric said, clearing his throat, "this is my father, Thomas Hale." For a moment, the table went quiet. Then one of the men, a tall, confident fellow in his 40s, stood up and smiled politely. "Mr. Hale, pleasure to meet you." I nodded, forcing a smile. Likewise, Eric gestured toward an empty chair near the end of the table sit. "Dad, have some food." Sophia hesitated, then quickly fetched an extra plate. She didn't make eye contact with me as she set it down. Her movements were brisk, efficient, not cruel, but distant. I could feel the discomfort radiating from the table. I sat quietly while they resumed their conversation. They talked about investments, stock markets, and summer homes. Occasionally, someone would make a polite remark in my direction, and I'd nod, pretending to follow along. But inside, I felt small, invisible. Halfway through dinner, the tall man, I later learned his name was Greg, leaned toward Eric and said with a smirk, "So, this is the famous Mr. Hale you've told us about, huh? The business genius who started it all?" Eric laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, well, he's retired now, trying to enjoy the simple life." "Simple life," Greg repeated, chuckling. "That's admirable." He raised his glass in my direction, "To simpler times." The others laughed softly, clinking their glasses. I smiled faintly and lifted my water. "To simpler times," I echoed, but my throat burned as I swallowed. Later, as the plates were cleared and dessert was served, I noticed how Sophia avoided sitting near me. She busied herself in the kitchen, occasionally whispering to Eric, her voice low and sharp. At one point, I heard her hiss, "You could have at least warned me. The house isn't even cleaned up properly for guests." "He's not a guest," Eric whispered back. "He's my father." "Then treat him like it," she snapped quietly. Their words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to stand, to tell them I could hear every syllable, but I stayed seated. Pride kept me still. When dessert came, Greg turned to me again. So, Mr. Hale, Eric says you had a bit of a rough patch in business. Must be tough starting over at your age, huh?" There was no malice in his voice, but there was something worse, curiosity laced with pity. I smiled faintly. "I suppose it teaches you what really matters." He nodded, clearly satisfied with that answer before turning back to his wine. As the evening went on, I felt myself shrinking further. I didn't belong here. The laughter, the polished words, the subtle looks had all told me that I was the ghost of a man they didn't want haunting their picture-perfect dinner. Finally, I stood up. "Thank you for the meal," I said softly. "I should be heading home." Sophia looked relieved. "Of course. It's getting late." But before I could leave, Lily ran out from her room, clutching a drawing. "Grandpa, look, I drew you a picture." I crouched down and took it from her, a bright, childish sketch of me holding her hand in front of a house. My eyes stung. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. I'll keep it safe." Sophia's voice softened. "Lily, say goodnight." "Grandpa has to go." She hugged me tightly before running back upstairs. I straightened up slowly, holding the drawing like it was made of glass. Eric walked me to the door. "Dad, I'm sorry about tonight," he said quietly. "It was just unexpected." "I understand," I said. "You have your life. I don't want to intrude." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not that. It's just, things are complicated. Sophia's been under pressure and the kids—" "I get it," I said again, cutting him off. "You don't need to explain." He nodded awkwardly. "I'll call you soon, okay?" I smiled faintly. Sure, but I knew he wouldn't. When I stepped outside, the night was colder than before. The streetlights cast long shadows across the driveway. I started walking, the sound of laughter fading behind me until there was nothing but silence. Halfway down the street, I stopped. I turned back to look at the house, the warm glow from the windows, the faint sound of a piano playing inside. For a moment, I imagined myself standing in that light again, surrounded by family, laughter, belonging. But then I blinked, and the illusion was gone. I walked home slowly, my steps heavy, the drawing clutched in my hand. Back in my room, I pinned Lily's drawing to the wall above my bed. It was the only color in that gray, lifeless space. I sat there for a long time, staring at it, thinking about all the choices that had led me here. When I built my company, I did it for Eric. I wanted him to have a life free from the struggles I knew. I gave him everything: education, connections, even the seed money for his first business. I never once asked for anything in return. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe giving too much makes people forget what effort means. But as I sat there, one thought grew louder in my mind: this test wasn't over. Not yet. I needed to see who my son truly was when life stripped away all comfort, when appearances couldn't protect him. I needed to know if the heart I'd raised was still beating under all that pride. The next morning, I went to the park near Eric's office. From a distance, I watched him arrive in his sleek car, greeting his employees with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him admiration. I wondered how he'd react if that world suddenly turned its back on him. Would he remember the lessons I taught him about humility, kindness, loyalty? Or would he crumble the way he assumed I had? As I watched him laugh with his colleagues, I felt a quiet determination settle over me. This wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about truth. A test not only for him, but for myself to see if love could survive disappointment. That night, I made a decision. I would disappear completely. No more calls, no more visits. Let him think I'd gone away, lost in the struggle. Let time reveal whether he'd come looking, whether guilt or love would bring him back. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of my small rented room, painting the floor with faint streaks of gold. But even the light felt heavy that day, as though it carried the weight of all the unspoken words between a father and his son. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my hands, rough, veined. The hands that had once built everything Eric now enjoyed. Those same hands had held him when he was born, taught him to walk, taught him to drive, and eventually handed him the keys to a life far easier than the one I ever had. Now those hands were empty. I thought about that night, the dinner, the politeness, the way Sophia's eyes darted around the table as if afraid of what her guests might think if a poor old man stayed too long. I replayed Eric's calm, rehearsed excuses. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But grief wasn't the end of my story, it was the ignition. I decided that day that I would return to Eric's house, not as a father hoping for acceptance, but as a stranger, a man stripped of everything, seeking nothing but the truth that wealth had hidden. So I began to change my appearance. I let my beard grow out. My once well-kept hair turned wild and gray. I stopped wearing my old tailored jackets and instead found a simple, worn-out coat from a thrift store. I became invisible, the kind of man people overlook on sidewalks. And when I looked at myself in the mirror after a week of that transformation, I barely recognized the man staring back. But beneath the wrinkles and exhaustion, there was something fierce, a glint in my eyes that reminded me of the man I used to be before money ever touched my life. That morning, I packed a small bag with only the essentials: a few clothes, an old notebook, and the watch my wife had given me on our 20th anniversary. It was cracked now, its leather strap fading, but I couldn't part with it. Before leaving, I glanced at her photograph on the nightstand. "You'd know what to do," I whispered. "You always did." Then I took a deep breath and walked out the door. It took nearly 2 hours by bus to reach Eric's neighborhood. I remember sitting by the window, watching the city change as we passed through from worn-down streets filled with chatter and life to clean, silent lanes lined with polished cars and manicured lawns. When I finally reached his street, my heart started pounding. It wasn't fear. It was the sharp ache of knowing I no longer belonged there. I stood at the edge of his driveway, staring at the same gleaming front door I'd once helped him paint years ago when he bought the house. I still remembered the laughter that day, the way he'd called me old man, and the pride in his voice when he said, "This is the start of our future, Dad." Now, I wasn't sure if that memory comforted me or tore me apart. I approached the door slowly and rang the bell. The sound echoed through the house. When the door opened, it was Sophia again. Her smile faltered instantly. She looked at me as though trying to remember where she'd seen me before, but my scruffy beard and ragged clothes told her I wasn't anyone worth remembering. "Yes?" she said, her tone polite but guarded. "Good afternoon," I said softly, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. "I'm sorry to bother you. I used to do some work around this area, gardens, repairs, that sort of thing. I was wondering if you might need help with anything. Just a few hours of work, maybe?" Her expression froze somewhere between pity and annoyance. "No, I don't think so. We have someone for that." I nodded, pretending not to notice the way she subtly stepped back to create distance. "Understood, ma'am. I just thought I'd ask. Times have been difficult lately." She gave a stiff smile. "I'm sure they have. Best of luck." The door began to close, but then I heard Eric's voice from inside. "Who is it, honey?" Sophia hesitated before answering. "Just someone asking for work." "Let me see." When he appeared beside her, my heart almost stopped. My own son stood before me, confident, comfortable, completely unaware of who I really was. His expression carried the kind of polite superiority that people wear when they believe they'll never fall. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You used to work around here?" "Yes, sir," I said quietly, a long time ago. "I'm just trying to find small jobs. Anything helps." He sighed as though the mere conversation was a burden. "Well, we don't have anything right now. Maybe try down the road. The Williams might need someone." "Thank you," I said, lowering my gaze. But as I turned to leave, Lily's voice echoed from inside. "Mom." "Dad, who's that?" Sophia turned, smiling gently. "Just someone looking for work, sweetheart. Go finish your homework." But Lily peeked around the doorframe, and the moment her eyes met mine, something flickered. Recognition. Even under the beard and the dirt. "Children see truth, adults have forgotten how to look for Grandpa?" she whispered. Sophia froze. Eric's head snapped toward me. The air went still. "Lily," he said quickly, "that's not Grandpa. Grandpa's away right now." She frowned. "But it looks like him." Sophia forced a laugh, stepping forward and blocking her view. "Sweetheart, you're being silly. Now, go inside." Lily looked at me one last time, confused, hurt, and then disappeared into the house. Eric turned back to me, his voice lower now. "Listen, I don't know what you're trying to do, but you can't just show up here like this." I tilted my head slightly. "Like what?" "Like this," he gestured at me, looking like someone who doesn't belong here. "My neighbors talk, you understand? I looked into his eyes. I understand perfectly. He shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice. Please leave before this becomes awkward. I'll call you later, but he didn't call later. That night, I sat at a park bench across from his house, the streetlights flickering above me. I watched their silhouettes through the large window, the family sitting together, laughing, eating dinner. My dinner was a cold sandwich from a convenience store. I didn't eat much. My stomach was too heavy with memories. Every bite reminded me of the nights I had worked overtime to afford that same roof they were now sitting under. Of the time I missed Lily's birth because I was still signing the papers that secured that house. And now I was sitting outside of it, a ghost watching the living. When the lights finally went out, I whispered to myself, it's not about revenge. It's about truth. The next few days passed in a blur. I took odd jobs around the area, trimming hedges, painting fences, cleaning yards. The people paid little, but their kindness was more valuable than money. Some offered coffee, others conversation. Most didn't judge. And every day I passed by Eric's house. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them, Sophia laughing in the garden, Eric washing his car, Lily playing with her friends. None of them ever noticed me. Until one afternoon. It was raining hard, and I just finished fixing a fence for a family down the street. My clothes were soaked through, my hands numb from the cold. I walked past Eric's house again, habit, I suppose. Through the blur of rain, I saw a car parked outside. A man I didn't recognize was walking up to the door carrying a briefcase. A lawyer, maybe. Or an investor. I slowed my pace, curiosity burning. When Eric opened the door, his voice carried sharp, impatient. They talked for a while, then shook hands. The man handed Eric a document, and Eric smiled. That same smile I used to see when he closed a good deal. It hit me, then he was still chasing more. Always more. And I wondered if he'd ever stop long enough to realize what he'd lost along the way. That night, I went back to my small house and sat in silence. The rain outside matched the storm in my chest. I reached for my old notebook again and flipped through the pages, each filled with observations, memories, pain. Then I stopped at the last page and wrote a single sentence. The test isn't over until the truth is undeniable. I knew what I had to do next. The following week, I contacted my lawyer, the only person who knew the truth about my hidden wealth. His name was Mr. Clark, an old friend who had helped me manage my estate quietly. When he answered the phone, his voice was warm. Thomas, I was wondering when you'd call. How's the experiment going? Painful, I said simply, but necessary. I think it's time for the next step. He sighed softly. Are you sure? Once we move forward, there's no going back. He'll know everything, I'm sure, I said, but not yet. I want to see him one more time to give him one last chance to remember what family means before truth slaps him harder than I ever could. Understood, Mr. Clark said. Just say the word when you're ready. When I hung up, I sat there for a long while. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like something had been washed to clean the streets, the sky, maybe even me. I realized then that no matter what came next, this wasn't just a test for Eric. It was one for me, too. Could I forgive him if he failed it? Or had too much already been broken? As I drifted to sleep that night, I remembered something my wife once told me. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting people fall. Only then do they learn how to stand again. Maybe she was right. And maybe, just maybe, my son was about to fall harder than he ever thought possible. Because soon he'd learn that the poor old man he turned away still held the keys to everything he once called home. And that truth, when it came, would not just test him, it would define him forever. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of it: damp earth, wet asphalt, and the faint sweetness of leaves after a storm. I walked slowly through the narrow streets, carrying the weight of the past few days in my chest like a stone I couldn't drop. My shoes squelched with each step, and the strap of my old bag cut into my shoulder. But I didn't mind. The pain grounded me, reminded me that I was still human, still feeling, still alive. As I turned the corner toward the small alley where my rented room sat, I saw her, Mrs. Jenkins, my elderly neighbor, standing by her gate with a basket of laundry. She was short, round, and always smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap. When she saw me, her wrinkled face lit up in a way that I had almost forgotten people could smile. "Morning, Tom," she called. "You look soaked again." You'll catch your death out there." I managed a faint smile. "Can't afford to melt, Mrs. Jenkins. I'm not made of sugar." She laughed, the sound warm and real. "Still got that humor of yours. Come on, get in here." I made soup. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Her small kitchen was a comforting chaos, the kettle always hissing, old photographs lining the wall, the faint ticking of a clock that seemed older than either of us. She poured the soup into a chipped bowl and pushed it toward me. "Eat," she said simply. I took a spoonful. It was simple broth, vegetables, a bit of rice, but it tasted like care. I hadn't realized how much I missed that. "You've been quiet lately," she said, watching me over her teacup. "Working too hard?" I stared into the bowl for a moment before answering. "You could say that. Been thinking too much too about family?" I looked up. Her eyes were sharp, kind, but knowing. She had seen me leave every morning and return each night, tired and silent. "You could say that too," I murmured. She nodded slowly. "You know, when my Henry was still alive, he used to say that family's like bread dough. You can stretch it, fold it, mess it up a bit, but if you let it rise with warmth, it always comes back stronger." Her words stayed with me long after I left her house. There was something about her simplicity, her belief that love, when given time, could heal anything that made me wonder if I was still giving Eric that chance, or if I had already written him off in my heart. That night, as I lay on my creaky bed, I thought of Lily's face the way she had looked at me, almost recognizing me. There was hope in that look, and it kept me awake for hours. The next morning, I saw Mrs. Jenkins again, this time sitting on her porch with a cup of tea and her little radio playing softly. She waved me over. "Tom, come sit. You look like you've got something heavy on your mind." I joined her. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain and roses. She tilted her head. "You're not just some handyman, are you?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you say that?" She smiled faintly. "Your hands tell me you've worked, but your eyes, they tell me you've lost something big. People like that don't just fix fences for spare cash. They're fixing something else." I couldn't help but laugh softly. "You should have been a detective." "Bah," she said, waving her hand, just old and observant. "So, who'd you lose?" "My son," I said finally. The words were heavier than I expected, or maybe he lost me. Hard to tell anymore. Mrs. Jenkins was quiet for a while. The radio played an old tune, something from her youth. Then she said, "Losing isn't always forever, you know. Sometimes it's just a pause, a waiting room before they find their way back." "Maybe," I said, "but some waiting rooms last a lifetime." She gave me a small smile. "Then, don't wait. Do something. Whatever it is you're holding back, maybe it's time to finish it." Her advice echoed in my head as I left her porch. Maybe it really was time. Later that day, while working on a fence 2 blocks away, I saw a familiar car pull up at the end of the street, Eric's black sedan. I froze. He stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, looking sharp in his navy suit. For a moment, the father in me wanted to call out to him, but the stranger in me stayed silent. He didn't notice me. He never did anymore. That night, I went back to my room and opened my notebook again. The pages were filled with my thoughts, scribbles of pain, lines of reflection, even a few angry words I wasn't proud of. But one line stood out. "The richest man isn't the one with money. It's the one who remembers who he is when everything's gone." I closed the notebook and made my decision. The next morning, I went to see Mr. Clark, my lawyer. His office was small, filled with old books and dust that caught the morning light like snowflakes. He looked up when I walked in. "Thomas," he said with a smile, "you look worse for wear." I chuckled. "That's the idea." He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed me one. "So, is it time?" "Almost," I said, "but I want to do one last thing. I want to know if Eric has changed even a little." Mr. Clark leaned back in his chair. "And how will you do that?" "I'll ask him for help," I said quietly. The lawyer frowned. "You already did." "He turned you away. I'll ask again," I said, not as his father, just as a man who's fallen on hard times. "Maybe he'll surprise me." Mr. Clark nodded slowly, "and if he doesn't, then he'll get a surprise of his own." Soon enough that afternoon, I returned to Eric's neighborhood again. I felt ridiculous, maybe even desperate. But there was a reason I needed to try once more, a flicker of hope that perhaps, beneath the polish and pride, my son still had a heart. When I reached his house, the sun was setting. I could see Lily playing in the yard, chasing a small dog that barked happily. Her laughter filled the air, and for a second, I almost forgot everything. I walked up to the gate, careful not to startle her. "That's a beautiful dog you've got there," I said softly. She looked up, startled, then her face brightened. "Hey, you're the man from before," I smiled. "Yes, you have a good memory." She tilted her head. "Mom said you were just looking for work. Did you find any?" "A few small jobs," I said, enough to keep me going. She hesitated. "You can come talk to my dad if you want. He's home." My heart tightened. "Is he?" Before I could say anything more, she turned and shouted, "Dad! The man's here again!" I wanted to stop her, but it was too late. Eric appeared at the door, irritation already clouding his face. He looked at me and sighed. "You again. I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I don't mean to bother you. I just needed some advice. Things have been rough." He crossed his arms. "I told you, there's nothing I can do. I'm not asking for money," I said, my voice calm. "Just a bit of your time. A place to sit for a while. Maybe some water. I've been walking all day." He hesitated, glancing at the neighbors, then back at me. "Fine." 5 minutes. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and roast chicken, a cruel reminder of dinners we used to share. He pointed toward a chair near the entryway but didn't invite me farther in. I sat down slowly, watching him pace. "You seem like a busy man." I said. "I am," he replied shortly, "so if you could get to the point." "I will," I interrupted gently. "I just wanted to say that sometimes life tests us in ways we don't see coming. Sometimes the people we turn away are the ones sent to show us who we really are." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," I said softly. "Just something I've learned." Sophia appeared from the kitchen then, her expression tightening when she saw me. "Oh, it's you again," she said under her breath. Eric waved her off. "He's leaving soon." She sighed and crossed her arms. "Maybe he should. The neighbors already saw you talking at the door last time." Her words stung not because they were cruel, but because they revealed everything. Their world was built on appearances, and I had become the stain they wanted to scrub out. I stood slowly, my heart heavy but steady. "You don't have to worry." "I won't come again," Eric exhaled, almost relieved. "That's for the best." As I turned to leave, I glanced at Lily standing at the foot of the stairs, her eyes wide and glistening. She didn't say anything, but her gaze followed me until I closed the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of my tiny room, watching the rain return. And then, for the first time in years, I cried. Not for the loss of money or pride, but for the son I had raised and the man he had become. In the morning, I went to see Mrs. Jenkins again. She took one look at me and knew he failed, didn't he? She said softly. I nodded. She put a hand on my arm, then stopped waiting. "Whatever you came here to do, finish it." I looked at her and smiled faintly. "You might be the wisest person I've met in a long time." She chuckled. "I just pay attention, dear. Now go. Go make things right, or make them remember what right even means." That afternoon, I called Mr. Clark. "It's time," I said simply. His voice was calm but carried an edge. "I'll prepare the documents. When he gets them, he'll know exactly who you are." I hung up the phone and looked out the window again. The rain had stopped once more. The sky was clearing. Mrs. Jenkins' kindness had reminded me that not all people forget what humanity feels like. She had given me soup when I was hungry, conversation when I was lonely, and courage when I was broken. And now I was ready. Eric was about to learn what real poverty was, not the kind that empties your wallet, but the kind that empties your soul. The kind that comes when you trade love for pride. And in that moment I realized that while I had hidden my wealth from him, what I was really hiding was something far more valuable, a truth that money could never buy. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to remind others what truly matters. And soon, my son would learn that lesson the hard way. The day I decided to reveal everything didn't start with thunder or drama, it began quietly. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself knows something is coming. I woke up before dawn. The streets were still, the world painted in shades of gray and blue. The city slept, unaware that someone's life, my son's life, was about to change forever. I brewed a cup of cheap instant coffee and sat by the window, watching the faint light creep between the clouds. The smell of rain still lingered in the air, but the storm had passed. It felt symbolic somehow. I thought of Eric, of the way he looked through me as if I were invisible, of Sophia's disdainful eyes, of the way she had wrinkled her nose when I stood at her door, of Lily, watching quietly from the stairs, her small face full of confusion and empathy far beyond her years. I wasn't angry anymore. That feeling had burned itself out. What remained was colder, clearer. Mr. Clark called at 9 a.m. sharp. His voice, as always, was precise, professional, but beneath it I could hear the faintest note of satisfaction. "It's ready," he said. "The documents are drawn. The property transfer, the accounts, the letter, all exactly as you requested." "Good," I said quietly. "Deliver them today." He hesitated. "Are you sure you want it done like this? No warning? No meeting?" "No," I said. "He's had enough chances to talk. I want him to learn the truth the way I learned his unexpectedly." There was a pause, then a slow sigh. "All right, he'll have the papers before evening." I hung up and sat back, closing my eyes. My hands trembled slightly. It wasn't fear, it was the weight of years finally coming full circle. I had built everything I had from scratch. The business, the estate, the savings, all of it. Not because I wanted luxury, but because I wanted Eric to have a life I never did. And yet, when he got that life, he forgot the man who gave it to him. Now he would see what life looked like without it. That afternoon, I took a long walk. The sun was weak behind the clouds, but the streets were alive, children playing, vendors calling, buses groaning down the road. I passed by Mrs. Jenkins' house and she waved from her porch, going somewhere. "Tom?" She called, "Just for a walk," I said. She nodded knowingly. "You've got that look. The one people get when they're about to do something that can't be undone." I smiled faintly. "You might be right." "Then, whatever it is," she said softly, "make sure it's fair. That word echoed in my head as I walked. Was this revenge or justice? Maybe both. By evening, the storm I had set in motion began to move. Eric was sitting in his office reviewing a proposal when his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, there's a courier here for you. Says it's urgent." He frowned. "At this hour? From who?" The assistant handed him the envelope. "It's from a Mr. Clark." "A lawyer." Eric barely looked up. "All right, leave it there." The assistant left, closing the door behind her. Eric opened the envelope carelessly and then froze. Inside was a thick stack of papers, neatly clipped, and a short handwritten note on top. The handwriting was old-fashioned, but unmistakable. It read, "Son, there are lessons in life no classroom can teach. Some truths you only learn when the mask comes off. Today, yours will." Dad. Eric stared at the note for several seconds, as if the words themselves refused to settle in his brain. Then he flipped through the papers. The more he read, the paler he became. His company shares no longer in his name, the house transferred, the accounts sealed, the entire inheritance he thought he'd quietly secured from me gone, frozen. At the bottom of the pile was a letter from Mr. Clark's firm, formal and cold. It stated that the wealth Eric believed he controlled had never truly been his, it had been under my trust, set to transfer only under specific moral conditions. Conditions he had now failed. For a long time he sat there, unable to move. The office clock ticked loudly in the silence. Sophia called a few minutes later. "Eric?" You're late. Dinner's ready." His voice trembled slightly. "Something's happened. What do you mean?" she asked sharply. He hesitated. "It's my father, the lawyer." Sophia's tone turned impatient. "What about him? Don't tell me that old man is still bothering us." Eric swallowed. "He's not bothering us. He's taken everything." The silence that followed was sharp. Then her voice, cold as steel. "What?" "The accounts, the house, it's all in his trust. It always was. We've been living on what he gave us. And now it's gone." Sophia's anger flared instantly. "That can't be. You told me everything. Was legally transferred to you years ago." "It was conditional," Eric said quietly. "On how I treated him." Sophia scoffed. "You mean because you didn't pamper his little ego when he came around pretending to be homeless?" He didn't answer, because deep down, he knew. This wasn't about ego. It was about respect. When he finally looked up from the papers, something inside him cracked. He saw, for the first time, what he had become. A man who had traded compassion for convenience. That night, I stayed in my small room, reading under the dim light of a single bulb. The rain had started again, soft and rhythmic. I imagined the storm brewing inside that house, the raised voices, the slammed doors, the arguments that words could no longer fix. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "Dad, please, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I could almost hear his voice behind those words, the same tone he used as a child when he'd broken something valuable and didn't know how to explain it. But this wasn't a broken vase or a cracked window. This was years of distance, pride, and silence. Still, I typed back, "Tomorrow, noon, Mr. Clark's office." The reply came instantly, "I'll be there." When morning came, I wore the same old coat I had worn the day I stood outside his house, faded, patched, and familiar. It felt fitting. At noon, I arrived early. The office smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Mr. Clark greeted me with a nod. "He's on his way." When Eric walked in, I barely recognized him. His tie was crooked, his eyes red. He looked like a man who hadn't slept because he hadn't dad, he began, his voice hoarse. I didn't know. I didn't. I raised a hand. "Sit?" He obeyed, like a child again. For a long time, I said nothing. I let the silence hang between us. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. Finally, I spoke. "Do you know why I did this?" He swallowed. "To punish me." I shook my head. "Whoa. To remind you," he frowned. "Remind me of what?" "What it means to be human," I said quietly. "You thought wealth made you powerful, but it only made you forget. Forget who you were. Forget where you came from. Forget me." He lowered his head. "When I came to your door," I continued, "I didn't come for money. I came to see if you still had kindness left in you. If you could see me not as a burden, but as a man who once carried you on his shoulders. You didn't just turn me away, Eric. You erased me." He looked up, tears finally forming. "I'm sorry." I sighed. "Apologies mean nothing without understanding." "I do understand," he said desperately. I was embarrassed. I didn't want Sophia to think. "That's the problem," I interrupted softly. "You've spent so long worrying about how things look that you've forgotten how they feel." The silence returned. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Finally, I slid a smaller envelope across the table. "In there," I said, "is something you can't buy back." "Not with all the money in the world." He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph him as a boy, sitting on my shoulders, both of us laughing, sunburned from a long summer day. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "I remember that day." "So do I," I said softly. "That's the day I promised myself I'd give you everything I never had. And I did. But somewhere along the way, I realized I'd given you too much of what I earned, and too little of what mattered." He looked broken, then not angry, not defensive. "Just broken." Mr. Clark cleared his throat gently. "The trust can still be reinstated," he said, "but not by law, by choice. It's up to Thomas." Eric turned to me. "Please," he said. "I'll make it right. I'll prove it." I studied his face, really studied it. Beneath the exhaustion, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. "Then start," I said, "not by fixing paperwork. By fixing yourself." He nodded, tears rolling freely now. When he left, the office felt strangely quiet. Mr. Clark looked at me and said, "Do you think he means it?" I stared out the window at the passing cars, the hum of the city, the world still spinning. "I don't know," I said, "but I think he's finally listening." That evening, I returned to Mrs. Jenkins' porch. She had 2 mugs of tea ready before I even sat down. "So?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "The storm's over." "For now." She nodded. "And the sun?" I looked up at the fading light between the clouds. "It's trying." We sat there quietly for a long while, the sky painted gold and pink. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The next chapter of my life was beginning not as a rich man or a poor man, but as a father learning how to forgive, and as a man who finally understood what true wealth was. Not money, not property, but peace. And though Eric had a long road ahead, I truly hoped that he would one day understand that too. Because wealth can vanish, but dignity is earned every day you choose to be kind. Days passed after our meeting, and though Eric had promised to make things right, I didn't expect miracles. Promises are easy. Change is not. I went about my days quietly, fixed things around Mrs. Jenkins' garden, walked to the park, fed the pigeons. For the first time in a long while, I felt unburdened not because everything was solved, but because I had finally spoken my truth. Still, every night I found myself wondering what Eric was doing. Whether he meant what he said in that office, whether he could truly understand what humility costs. The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 days later, there was a knock at Mrs. Jenkins' door. It was early, the sun had barely risen, and the world was still wrapped in morning fog. She opened it and gasped, "Good Lord, you look awful." Eric stood there, soaked from the drizzle, his hair a mess, his suit wrinkled. In his hand, he held a small brown bag like one might use to pack a meal. "Is my father here?" he asked quietly. I stepped into the doorway, my heart heavy. "What brings you here this early?" He looked down, shame flickering across his face. "Sophia. Left? I didn't move, left?" He nodded after she found out the accounts were frozen. Said she didn't marry me to live like a pauper. Took Lily with her to her mother's. Said she'd come back when I got my life together. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head in disgust. "Ungrateful woman." Eric's voice broke, she said. "I was just like you. That I deserved it." The words hit me like cold water. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to tell him this was the cost of his choices. But looking at him drenched, lost, stripped of pride, I couldn't come in. I said simply. He hesitated, then stepped inside. Mrs. Jenkins fetched him a towel while I poured tea. He sat quietly, staring at the floor. After a while, he said, "I've been thinking a lot. About everything you said, about the kind of man I've become." I nodded, waiting. I used to think kindness was weakness. He continued that the world only respected power. But now I see that power means nothing when there's no one left to care about you. He looked up. Eyes red. "Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the polished businessman who used to sneer at my old clothes or roll his eyes at my stories. This was a son stripped down to his truest self, then start by helping. I said, "Not for me. For others. You've spent too long taking. Now learn to give." He nodded immediately. "Tell me what to do." That's how it began. Every morning, Eric came to the community shelter where I volunteered sometimes. It wasn't glamorous work serving food, cleaning tables, mending chairs, but he did it without complaint. At first, the others didn't know who he was, just another man trying to find purpose. But soon, they noticed something rare in him. The way he spoke to the old veterans with respect. The way he helped a young mother carry her sleeping child. He wasn't pretending. He was trying. One afternoon, I found him kneeling by a broken stove, sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands. He looked up and smiled faintly. "You always said hard work builds character." "Guess I'm finally getting some," I chuckled softly about time misses. Jenkins often watched us from across the street. One evening, she called out Tom. "Your boy's different now." I see it in his eyes. I nodded. He's remembering who he was. Still, I knew the real test hadn't come yet. It's easy to change when the world's watching harder when no one is. That test came a week later. Sophia showed up. It was late afternoon, and Eric and I were repairing a leaky faucet in the shelter's kitchen when she walked in, sunglasses on, lips pursed, her designer coat a sharp contrast against the humble walls. "Eric?" she said flatly. He froze Sophia. "What are you doing here?" She looked around disdainfully, so it's true. "You're actually wasting your time here." "My God, how far you've fallen." Eric wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm working," she scoffed. "Working? This isn't work, Eric. This is charity, the kind of thing people pretend to do when they've run out of real purpose." He frowned but stayed calm. "It's honest work." "Honest?" She snapped. "We had everything, Eric. A home, a name, respect. And you threw it all away because you wanted to play the hero for a man who couldn't let go of the past." I stood quietly in the corner, saying nothing. Eric's jaw tightened. "That man is my father." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Your father ruined us." "No," he said slowly. "He saved me." She blinked, stunned. "You can't be serious." "I used to think money made me better," he said, "but it made me worse. I treated people like they didn't matter, even him. But I see it now. I was wrong." Sophia stared at him for a moment, then said coldly, "You sound just like him. Maybe you belong here." She turned to leave, but Eric didn't stop her. He just said quietly, "Tell Lily, I love her." Sophia hesitated. Maybe she expected him to beg. But he didn't. She walked out, heels clicking against the floor, and the door shut behind her. The room was silent for a long time. Then Eric exhaled. "I thought it would hurt more," he murmured. "But it feels freeing." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's what happens when you stop living for the wrong people." From that day on, he worked harder. Not for redemption, not for reward, but for meaning. He began organizing drives for the shelter, using what connections he still had. Slowly, people started noticing. Not the old Eric, but a new one. Months passed, and one morning, the shelter director called me into her office. "Your son's been doing incredible work," she said. "We'd like to name him coordinator for the new outreach project." I smiled. He's earned it. When I told him, his eyes lit up not with pride, but gratitude. "I don't deserve this," he said. "That's why you do," I replied. That evening, he and I walked through the park. The sky was pink with sunset, and the air smelled of rain and new beginnings. "I wish Mom were here," he said softly. "She'd have been proud." "She is," I said. "She always believed in the man you could become." He smiled faintly. "I think I finally understand what she meant when she said, 'Wealth isn't about money.'" I looked at him. "And what do you think it's about?" He thought for a moment about what you leave behind in people's hearts. For a long time, we walked in silence. The city glowed beneath the fading light, and I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Eric had fallen, yes, but he had also risen, not as a rich man, but as a good one. And as I looked at him, tall, quiet, grounded, I realized the test had never been about what he'd lose. It was about what he'd find when everything was gone. The next morning, he came to me holding an envelope. "Dad," he said, "this is for you." Inside was a small check, not much, but enough to show effort. "It's from the project fund," he said, "for the repairs at the shelter. I wanted you to handle it." I laughed. "You're trusting me with money now?" He smiled. "You're the only one I trust." That simple line broke me in ways nothing else had. I looked at him, my son, the boy who once forgot my face, now looking at me with pride. He had learned what no amount of money could teach: humility, empathy, and love. The night before the shelter's new wing opening, he came to my small apartment. "Dad," he said, "I want you there tomorrow. You deserve to see what you started." And when I stood there the next day watching him cut the ribbon, surrounded by the people he had helped, I realized something profound. The test was over. The lesson had worked. And I, too, had changed. Because forgiveness, like wealth, only multiplies when you give it away. That evening, as the lights dimmed and the city went quiet, Eric and I walked home side by side. No words, no pride, just peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a father chasing redemption or a man testing loyalty. I was just happy, and that was the richest I had ever been. There's a certain peace that comes when you've lived long enough to see the lessons of your pain become someone else's light. I never planned for my story to unfold this way. When I first hid my wealth from my son, I thought I was teaching him a lesson about greed. But what I truly discovered was something far greater: the weight of a father's heart, the patience of love, and the redemption that only humility can bring. As I sit on the porch of my little cottage, now the same one I first returned to when I pretended to be a poor man, I can still hear the echoes of those hard days. The silence after Eric slammed the door in my face. The sting of rejection, sharper than any poverty could bring. The fear that maybe I had failed not as a father, but as a man who loved too quietly. But life, it has a way of turning pain into poetry if you give it time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The world felt still. My son, Eric, now a man of balance and compassion, walked toward me carrying 2 mugs of tea. He smiled softly. "Still prefer the cheap kind, huh?" I chuckled. "Tastes better when it's shared." He sat beside me, silent for a while. We both looked at the sky, the same one that had witnessed our battles, our mistakes, our reconciliations. After a long pause, he said, "Dad, do you ever think about the beginning? The day you came to my house and I didn't let you in?" I nodded slowly every day, not out of anger, but gratitude, because that moment changed everything. He looked down. "I've never forgiven myself for that day." I placed a hand on his shoulder, "and I never blamed you. You were blind, not cruel. You had everything, yet saw nothing. Sometimes the richest men are the poorest in spirit." He took a deep breath. "I was so ashamed when I realized what I'd become. You gave me everything, and I couldn't even give you kindness." "You gave me something better later," I said softly. "Gave me redemption." He smiled faintly, eyes glassy. "You make it sound easier than it was." "Oh, it wasn't easy," I said, sipping my tea. "You see, forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It rewrites what it means." Later that evening, Lily joined us. She was a teenager now, confident, bright-eyed, and full of the same warmth that once lived in her father's heart before the world hardened it. She sat between us, holding an old photo album. "Grandpa," she said, flipping through the pages, "why? Are there so few pictures of you when you were young?" I smiled because we didn't take as many back then. We made memories, we didn't capture them. She studied one of the photos, a younger version of me, holding Eric as a child. "You look happy here." "I was," I said. That was the day Eric learned to ride a bike. He fell 3 times, scraped his knees, and cried like the world had ended. Eric groaned. "Oh no, not this story again." I laughed, and yet, by the end of the day, he was flying down the street, shouting that he didn't need my help anymore. Lily giggled. "What happened after that?" I smiled wistfully. "Crashed into a bush." They both laughed, but I continued. "He got back up. That's what mattered. He learned that falling wasn't failure. It was part of learning how to balance." Lily leaned against my shoulder. "You always have a lesson in your stories." Gran nodded. "Because life does. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every moment we wish we could erase, they all come back as teachers." The weeks passed peacefully after that. I found joy in small things: the smell of morning rain, the laughter from next door, the warmth of family dinners. Sometimes Sophia joined us too. The bitterness that once surrounded her had melted away. She was humbler now, softer, a mother who had learned to love again without pride. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Sophia raised her glass quietly to second chances. She said, "We all lifted our glasses to second chances," Eric echoed. And I added softly, "to hearts that learn to forgive." That moment, that simple toast was worth more than all the gold I had hidden away. One afternoon, months later, I received a letter. It was from the local community board. They wanted to name a new scholarship after me, the Lawson Legacy Award, for students who came from humble beginnings but dreamed big. I smiled as I read it, then placed the letter on Eric's desk. "This isn't for me," I told him. "It's for you to continue." He looked surprised. "Dad, they want to honor you, and I want to honor what came from me," I said firmly. "You, Lily. The people you've helped. I don't need a name on a wall. I need the lesson to live on." He was quiet for a long time before saying, "You've taught me more by losing your wealth than I ever learned by having it." I smiled. Then maybe I did something. Right one night after everyone had gone to bed, I walked out to the porch again. The moon hung low, silver and soft, bathing the world in light. I thought about my life, the journey from wealth to humility, from pride to peace. The test I thought I was giving my son had, in truth, been given to me. Because what is a father's heart if not a constant test of love? We love even when it hurts. We forgive even when we're forgotten. We wait, not because we're weak, but because we believe. And belief, that quiet, stubborn faith in the goodness of the people we raise, that's what keeps the world from falling apart. I whispered into the night, "Thank you for proving me wrong, son." From inside, I heard Eric's voice, half asleep. I heard that. Daddy smiled. Good years later, when I was too old to work, Eric insisted I move into the main house. I resisted at first, claiming I didn't need special treatment, but he wouldn't hear of it. "Dad," he said, "you spent your life teaching me how to be rich in heart. Let me give some of that back." So I moved in not as a burden, but as a blessing. Every morning, Lily would visit my room, showing me her sketches and plans for the future. She wanted to study architecture and design homes for families who couldn't afford them. "I want to make places that feel like love," she said once. I smiled. Then, "You'll never run out of work." Years turned to decades. And though my hair thinned and my steps slowed, the fire inside me never dimmed. I watched my son raise his daughter with care. I watched his wife rebuild her dignity through humility. And I watched myself become a part of something greater than wealth, a legacy built not from money, but meaning. When I finally grew too weak to move much, Eric brought me to the garden each morning. I'd sit there, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flowers sway. He'd sit beside me, sometimes silent, sometimes sharing stories about his work or Lily's achievements. One morning, he said, "Dad, you once told me that love tests us." I never asked, "What did you mean by that?" I took a long breath. Love isn't proven when everything is perfect. It's proven when everything falls apart and you still choose to care. That's what makes it real. He nodded, understanding. "Then I guess you passed every test, huh?" I smiled faintly. "No, son. We both did." As my days grew quieter, I began writing a small journal, letters, memories, reflections. I titled it, "The Moral of a Father's Heart." In it, I wrote everything I had learned. That pride can destroy what love builds. That money can build houses, but never homes. That forgiveness is the only true inheritance worth leaving behind. And when I finished, I sealed it in an envelope and left it on Eric's desk with a note. "When you doubt yourself as a father, read this. You'll see that even broken men can raise something beautiful." Months later, my time came peacefully. surrounded by the very people who once drifted apart. My son held my hand. Sophia wept quietly. Lily whispered, "I love you, Grandpa." And as I closed my eyes, I didn't see regret. I saw love, fierce, flawed, and unbreakable. It's been 5 years since Dad passed, but his words live on in everything I do. The Lawson Legacy Foundation has grown, helping hundreds of families. Every time I speak at a fundraiser or visit a shelter, I hear Dad's voice reminding me, "Never forget where you came from. Never forget who you became when everything was stripped away." Sometimes, I still go to that old cottage. It's empty now, but when I stand on the porch, I swear I can still feel him beside me, sipping his cheap tea, smiling at the sunset. And I realize my father didn't just hide his wealth, he revealed his heart. That's the true inheritance he left me. A father's love is not measured by the money he leaves behind, but by the strength he builds within his child. When love is tested and still endures, that's when it becomes eternal. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Family, forgiveness, and love. They're the real treasures we often forget to value. And if you want to hear more stories like this filled with lessons, heart, and redemption, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because sometimes, the next story might remind you just how powerful love and forgiveness can be.